We've all seen sad little florals on thrift store shelves, and chances are you pass them by. Well, here's an idea for elevating humble faux flowers like this one that I purchased for only 99 cents. Grab an empty mason jar or spaghetti sauce jar and fill it about half full of some straw-like material such as excelsior or raffia. Mix in a few fake eggs, then add your faux flowers. My flower was attached to the faux dirt, so I used an X-Acto knife to cut it out. I wanted to keep the fake flower bulb, so I wrapped a few strands of raffia around it and hot glued it in place to conceal the styrofoam. This way it will just blend in with the raffia in the jar. Now for a finishing touch. Print out an image of a vintage seed packet to match your faux flowers. You could decoupage the seed packet to your jar if you like, but I just held it in place with some raffia tied around the glass jar.
Do you wish you could find beautiful home decor at truly bargain prices? Well, chances are your thrift store has some hidden gems that you're probably overlooking. In today's video, I want to reveal the untapped potential of 10 common and often disregarded thrift store items. I'll be transforming my finds into some lovely rustic spring decor. So, if you're ready to find the beauty in common items, let's get started.
Here's an idea for elevating a small figurine that might otherwise go unnoticed. Start with a base, such as a candlestick or wooden spool. Then take a bendable faux vine and twist it into a circle, wrapping the two ends together. To attach the vine to the spool, hot glue about 2 inches of one end of the vine into the center of the spool. Decorate the wreath by hot gluing leaves or small flowers to the vine. You could also glue some bird eggs to the vine for Easter decor. Next, hot glue moss to the top of the spool and over the vine. Then grab your figurine. I tied a ribbon around the neck of a small lamb figurine and then hot glued it to the top of the moss. Finally, I wrapped some additional ribbon around the spool. I decided to make a second one, this time using 2 small vines that I twisted together and inserted them into a smaller spool of thread. Since I had added leaves to the first wreath, this time I added flowers. I was able to hot glue individual flowers to the ends of the little branches, pushing the little branch into the plastic tube on the back of the flower blossom. I added a vintage bird figurine to the top of the spool, pushing the wires on its underside into the center of the spool. Then I glued some moss around the bird, and finally I glued the end of the thread on the spool to the bird's beak. Here's an idea for making use of small fabric scraps. I bought several unfinished quilt squares at the Goodwill bins for less than $1. Print out a butterfly shape in a size to fit your fabric scrap. Align the butterfly on your fabric and pin it in place. Then cut out the shape. Remove the paper pattern and then pin the fabric butterfly to a solid colored piece of secondary fabric. Then cut around the butterfly so that the secondary fabric is slightly larger, creating a 1/4 of an inch border around the quilt butterfly. Hot glue or sew the edges of the quilt butterfly to the backing material, leaving a small opening. Then fill the butterfly with some pillow stuffing, using the eraser end of a pencil to help move the stuffing around. Then glue or stitch the opening closed. To add a body to your butterfly, use a straight clothespin. I painted mine with some white chalk paint, and when the paint was dry, I distressed them with sandpaper. Just slide the clothespin down the center of the butterfly. If you want, you could also twist some wire around the top of the clothespin to create antennae. Lamps are another item that many of us overlook at thrift stores. When the shades have been removed and they're all shoved together, they do tend to look junky. So you've got to take a closer look. I spotted this branch lamp and knew with a few additions, this lamp could be really special. You probably already guessed that I'm going to add some ceramic birds to this lamp. To attach them, I mixed up some JB Weld epoxy. I applied a good amount of the epoxy to a few spots where I thought the birds would adhere best. Although this is 5-minute epoxy, it actually takes more like 10 to 15 minutes for the epoxy to harden enough to hold the birds in place. So I taped them in place until the epoxy had dried. The birds seemed firmly attached, but just to be safe, I filled in any gaps with caulk, smoothing it out with my fingers. Once the caulk was dry, I spray painted the lamp with Zinsser primer. Next, I was going to spray paint it green, but for a more rustic look, I decided to brush on green chalk paint instead. I gave it 2 coats, and when it was dry, I brushed on white wax, making sure to get into all of the grooves in the branches. Then I carefully dabbed away the excess wax with a rag. I love how the birds look like they have always been a part of this lamp. You'll probably see this lamp again in an upcoming room makeover that I have planned. Small wood decor is easy to find at most thrift stores and usually very inexpensive. I thrifted this wood wheelbarrow for only $1.84. I pulled out all of the potpourri that had been glued inside. Instead, I wanted to fill it with small carrots. The Dollar Tree carrots were the right size, but not the right look. To create more rustic-looking carrots, I pulled out the green raffia from the top of each carrot and then unwrapped the orange yarn to reveal the styrofoam center. To recover the styrofoam, I cut and sometimes ripped small strips of fabric. Then I wrapped the fabric strips around the carrot, using a little hot glue to hold the fabric at the start and end of each strip. Once the styrofoam was completely covered, I cut some new green raffia into small strips and pushed them into the hole at the top of the carrot. I added a bit of hot glue to secure the raffia in place. The wheelbarrow had a small straw hat glued to the side, which I pried off. Then I used a razor blade scraper to remove the hot glue left behind on the side of the wheelbarrow. I had bought a flocked rabbit at Walmart for $3 and thought that he needed to wear that straw hat. So I used an X-Acto knife to cut out 2 holes for the rabbit's ears and then pushed the hat in place. I thought it turned out pretty cute. Then I just needed to load up the wheelbarrow with the rustic carrots and the flocked rabbit. If a thrift store flower arrangement contains a bird nest, you can bet it's coming home with me. I pulled this pretty green nest from a $5 Goodwill wreath. Let's make this bird nest the star of the show. Start with a planter pot. I'm using an old terracotta pot that I had previously painted with gardening lime. Add styrofoam to your pot, and then add a sturdy faux stem or thick vine that will stand upright. Instead of cutting down my stem, I bent it to create a branch. To make the faux stem look more realistic, I cut some ivy vines from my yard and stuck them in the styrofoam surrounding the faux stem. Then I took some florist wire and wrapped it around the vines a couple times, twisting it tight. Next, I took my bird's nest and sat it atop the ivy vines. This nest had a wired stem on the underside, which had originally held it to the wreath. I twisted this stem around the other vines. Then I hot glued the top of each ivy vine into the nest. Then I hot glued pieces of moss over the ends of the ivy vines to further secure them to the nest. I also hot glued little pieces of moss on the vines to conceal the florist wire. I finished filling the pot with styrofoam and hot glued sheet moss over the top of the styrofoam. And then I stuck a few stems of greenery into the styrofoam to add a little interest to the pot. Just like with the wreaths that I had created on the spools, I hot glued a few leaves to the vine, and finally I wired a bird to the branch. Although lovely, this embroidered table runner had several stains, so I'm sure many people passed it by. But I knew that I could repurpose the non-stained areas. I found a rabbit shape online that I liked. Then I taped 2 pieces of cardstock together and used my Cricut machine to cut out the rabbit shape. I wanted to include as much of the pretty embroidery as I could within the rabbit shape. I folded the tablecloth over on itself with the pretty sides facing inside and pinned the 2 pieces of fabric together. Then I traced around the rabbit pattern on the back side. I used my sewing machine to stitch along the pencil line, leaving one small opening. Before turning the fabric right side out, I cut slits along the fabric edges. This will help the fabric conform to the rabbit shape. Once the fabric was right side out, I used the eraser end of a pencil to help push out the ears and legs. Then I filled the rabbit with pillow stuffing. You can hand sew, machine sew, or glue the opening closed. For additional embellishment, I glued a piece of lace around the rabbit's belly. This will also conceal the seam if you sewed it on the machine or glued it. Alternately, instead of sewing the opening closed, you could hot glue a small dowel rod inside the opening and then hot glue the other end of the dowel rod into a spool or candlestick to create tabletop decor. I see trays at my thrift store all the time, and because I already have several, I don't always buy them. But I thought this tray was especially pretty and a perfect candidate for reverse decoupage. I printed out this vintage image of a hare from the Graphics Fairy website. I cut out the hare, leaving only a skinny border of white around the edges. I brushed Mod Podge onto the tray and onto the front of the image. Then I placed the image face down onto the tray. To assure that the image was firmly pressed to the tray, I smoothed over the paper with a plastic scraper. Then I repeated this process with some word labels. If you're using words or phrases, make sure that you mirror them before printing so that the image will read correctly when placed face down. I let this dry overnight. The next day, I spritzed the paper with water, getting it damp but not soaking wet. And then I used my fingers to rub off the top layer of paper, revealing the image underneath. Keep in mind that with reverse decoupage, you're going to get a more aged, rustic appearing image, not the crisp, bright image you get with traditional decoupage. I let the tray dry, and then I brushed on a top coat of Mod Podge to seal and protect the images. My Goodwill often groups crafting supplies together in Ziploc bags or even in plastic totes and sells the whole package for one, usually very cheap price. These wood plaques were in a bag with a bunch of plastic Easter eggs, but for only $1.69, it was still a good deal. Originally, I wanted to stain the edges, but the wood was really rough, so I painted them with moss green chalk paint instead. While the paint was drying, I printed out 2 vintage Easter card images in a size to fit the wood egg. To adhere them, I brushed Mod Podge to both the wood and to the back of the image, and then lined up the image on the wood plaque. I smoothed out the paper to remove any air bubbles and to assure good adhesion. Once the Mod Podge was dry, I cut off most of the excess paper, and then I rubbed sandpaper along the edges to remove the remaining paper. To create a hanger for the plaques, I drilled a small hole in the top center of the egg and screwed in a small eye hook. Then I brushed on a top protective coat of Mod Podge over the paper. Next, I decided to add a butterfly near the eye hook. To create a more realistic looking butterfly, I pulled the wings out from its styrofoam body. I used a drop of hot glue to join the two sets of wings back together, holding the wings slightly apart as the hot glue dried. I hot glued that center point to the side of the wood plaque. Then I broke a tiny piece off the black styrofoam body and glued it over the spot where the butterfly was glued to the plaque. Finally, I ran some lace through the eye hook for easy hanging. I thrifted this metal watering can several months ago and listed it in my online store. I thought it was a great find, but week after week, no one bought it. So today, I want to show you how easy it is to elevate a simple watering can. I wanted to keep the rustic charm, but tone down the metal industrial look. So I painted it with one coat of white chalk paint. When the paint was dry, I distressed the can with both a wet wipe and with some fine grit sandpaper. I cut up a lavender bush from Walmart and threw the stems in the watering can. Then for something unexpected, I hot glued a faux butterfly to one of the stems. Remember, for a more realistic looking butterfly, remove the body and hot glue the inner edges of the wings together. Finally, I decided to print out a vintage lavender seed packet. I cut a slit in one corner of the image, ran some ribbon through the slit, and then tied it to the handle. Alternatively, you could decoupage a lavender image to the side of the can. I hope you'll let me know which of today's projects was your favorite, and I hope you got lots of inspiration for creating beautiful home decor using common thrift store items. And if you want even more spring decor ideas, here's another video I think you'll enjoy.